Hi, everybody. Welcome to our podcast, The Old College Try. I'm Peg Keough, and today I'm joined by my guest, Jenna Schebell. Jenna has experience working in college admissions offices as well as high schools. Today, Jenna and I will be talking about what happens after you submit your college admissions application. She's going to share insights and answer questions like, how do colleges evaluate an app? Do they all follow the same process? Hint, they do not. How do colleges decide who to accept? So stick around. We're going to talk about a lot of great stuff that you're going to want to hear. Okay, so before we get started, I will share my song as we always do. So this song is near and dear to my heart. My son just got married in last November. So we had our mother-son dance, and I wanted to do something fun, not just the sway back and forth kind of deal that most people do. And I wanted to create a dance. So we actually got a little help. We paid for an hour of help to do that because there's no way I was going to choreograph a dance. And my son gave me he said, what about these 5 or 6 songs that we chose from? And so I ended up picking this song called Slide. It's the Goo Goo Dolls.
Yeah,
It was a really fun song. We didn't dance the whole song because that would have been a lot of choreographing, but we had a really good time. Do you know that song, Jenna?
absolutely do. Yes. So why don't we slide? I do.
So yeah. Okay, well, so that's our song for the week. So without further ado, let's kick in here. So as I said earlier, a few minutes ago, Jenna has this super cool background. She started on the college side, was an admissions counselor at University of Tampa, and then went on to leadership roles in admissions at least one other college, if not 2. Then she shifted over to high school. So she worked in college counseling, one-on-one with kids in high school settings. And then, as I said earlier, now she's transitioned to having her own business, College Navigators, and doing all admission stuff with kids, helping them navigate this whole process. So is there anything else you want to add to that before we get into the nitty-gritty here, Jenna?
Sure. I mean, I think you nailed it in terms of my background and experience. So I come into the space with over kind of 20 years of experience, whether it was working on the college side, so learning really how college is a business and how institutional priorities and decisions by the board all drive enrollment. And then I switched over to the high school side, which you see that emotional side from the student perspective of what it's like to apply to 10, 15 different schools and how every school is kind of looking for something different and how to shape the application. And then moved into, like you said, the college navigators. But I think the part that a lot of people don't realize is social media was never an intention of mine at all. It was just more of going through the kind of ropes of starting up a business where you're getting a website and you're creating your Facebook and your Instagram, and you're doing all those things. And so as I entered the space, I saw just kind of how muddy the waters are in social media and how there are just so many quote unquote experts in the space telling you what you need to be doing. Many of them, in my opinion, are very kind of fear inciting. If you don't do this by a certain time, you're never going to amount to anything. So there was just a lot of confusion in the space. And so I would see it and just look at the people that were posting things and just say to myself, like, they really don't even have any expertise whatsoever, having actually worked in the field. And so I think it was at that point that I was like, let me just start speaking some truths in this space. And so that is really where the college navigators grew. Like I said, it was never my intention. I was really just trying to help students, but I guess in the process of helping students by putting things out there in the social media space, just people started following and listening along. So I always kind of threw that in there because I think there are a lot of people out there that use the space very purposely to, this is my business, whereas this was kind of just a side thing that kind of came about as I entered into the space.
Yeah. And I appreciate you because I think how you said quote unquote experts. Yeah, social media is a little scary because there's just a lot of people out there sharing. That's a whole other podcast in and of itself, but who really aren't experts. They might not have bad motives, but sharing
Right.
information that's not accurate that people that are in stressful situations are grabbing onto. So yeah, definitely follow Jenna. She's got it going on social media. And that's just so interesting that it's just part of having a business now, but it wasn't your intention to get
Right.
into this kind of influencer role. But there you are. So it's a good thing. It's a
But
good
here I
thing.
am.
So let's start talking about this. So, Matt and I say this all the time, and at CAP we talk about this, but I want you to share your take. We say colleges are businesses, and we tell
Mhm.
families like they're nonprofits, but don't kid yourself, they
Yeah.
are businesses. So what does that mean to you? Can you elaborate on that from your experience? And you've been on on that
Yeah.
side.
Absolutely. I mean, tuition obviously drives enrollment, and enrollment drives, the success of the school. And so I think what a lot of people don't realize, especially I feel like most people in general, I know there's people that start very early with college playing. Some people will do, middle school, but I would say most people start junior year, right? And they start thinking about college. And what they don't realize is colleges have already sat down, spring this time of year, and they've mapped out their institutional goals for next year. And so they could be looking to grow certain majors, to maybe eliminate certain majors, to maybe grow certain populations. Like they have all these ideas of what they want to do, and you haven't even applied yet. And I think that's where students need to understand like what can make you absolutely perfect for one school could go against you completely at another school. And yet you are the same applicant with the same skills and GPA and SAT and all of those things. But what works for one school doesn't work for another. And so many times I think students take things very personally. And it's like you have to understand there's a much bigger picture of a college that is shaping a class, that is adhering to things that come way above even the admissions office in terms of what's driving those decisions. And I think once parents and students can understand that perspective, they can kind of back up and say, okay, this isn't so personal. I know it feels very personal when you get that decision, whether it's a yes or a no, but in the big scheme, you're this tiny little piece of a big puzzle that's being put together.
Yeah, yeah, and that just I always tell parents, guys got to take a deep breath. Your child has to take a deep breath. You can't, like to your point, you can't know priorities that these colleges have. That's
Hmm.
where like talking to neighbors and family and friends and saying, "Well, so and so did this, I'm going to do this." I would think on the admission side is not helpful. And then for my expertise on the financial aid side, it's absolutely not helpful unless you're really going to say, do we make exactly the same amount of money? Is our child exactly the same as far as merit and our assets? And nobody's going to do that, right? So I think one of the key things you said, this is an emotional process, but the student self-esteem should not be linked to getting in or
Right.
not getting in. Even getting in, you get into
Hmm.
whatever your favorite school or some selective school, both sides of it, casting that wide net of having similar schools, because to your point, and disagree with me if you want, but you might get into one school that on paper is
Hmm.
looking for the same type of student at another school, and you
Right.
get flat out rejected from one and get
Hmm.
into another and maybe get nice merit or whatever. So you get a nice package on top of it. And then you scratch your head and say, how does this make sense? And it's probably tied into their priorities and things that families will never know about.
Right. Yeah, I always try to tell students like one decision doesn't dictate another. There's so many students that will say like, "Oh, I got into this school. What does that mean for this one?" And I'm like, "Absolutely nothing. Like one decision is not going to determine another outcome."
Yeah. 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 Okay. So now let's talk about, because I think this is going to be eye opening for our audience here. So, a completed application hits a school. And
Mhm.
just to make this even more complicated, every school doesn't address how are we making this admissions decision the same way. So, why don't you talk through a few examples of schools and how how they do it, just to give everybody a flavor for it's can be very different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are some schools that are just completely GPA, SAT driven where they just have benchmarks in place, as long as you have certain criteria, you're typically getting in. Those tend to be the schools that are more favorable with admission rates, right? So there's just more to it. Like I said, GPA, SAT driven. But then there are other schools, especially as you get into the more selective schools where you hear the word holistic all the time. It is a very holistic approach, and they're really diving into all parts of the application. And they may have various ways that they're reading it. So you may have your territory, regional rep reading your application. Sometimes there's two people reading it. Sometimes, if it's a direct admit by major school, it may have like a pre read by someone, but then it goes off to the actual like College of Business or College of, Arts and Sciences. There are committee based reviews where, again, there may be a pre read involved, but then the entire admission committee comes together to try to shape the class and say, okay, what is this person bringing versus this person? I mean, I feel like that's very common, especially at the smaller liberal arts school where they are sitting around and really shaping the class. And then I think even too within the evaluation, you have some schools that are recalculating GPAs and they're pulling out certain core academic classes, giving weights to APs and dual enrollments and IB classes. And then you have other schools that say, we're not going to recalculate. We already know everyone has strong GPAs typically that are applying, but we are going to dissect the level of rigor and we're going to sit down and say, in context to the school that they went to, are they taking advantage of the highest rigor available, whatever that looks like at their school? So, and I think that's where students sometimes it gets confusing because every single school is going to have their own admissions process. And very rarely does a school rely solely on a GPA, especially because GPAs are not consistent across whether it's the United States, the world. Every school calculates GPA. So just by simply saying, like, oh, I have a 3.8, what does that mean? It's very hard. So that's why schools are taking everything into context to where they actually attend.
I was gonna ask you about the whole GPA thing, so thanks for gliding into that one because I think there's a lot of stress around my GPA, and to your point, these colleges, some of them take it as is, and some pull parts out and create their literally their own proprietary GPA to look at kids
Hmm.
across the board. So again, it's another place where it's just like there's so much you don't know, there's so much you can't affect. All the student can do, you just do your best and you get a good list with get like I said earlier, cast a wide net, and you just leave all that because you don't really know. And the colleges aren't, sometimes if you ask, they'll tell you, but you're not going to go and calculate these GPAs and figure out, oh, Vandy's going to look at my GPA like this
Hmm.
versus that. So there's a
Right.
different process of how they evaluate the applications is what I'm hearing from you. And then
Hmm.
GPA, which is a big focus, that can be variable from school to school. So I have people all the time, parents that are stressing, like, well, we live XYZ and there's only like 4 APs offered at our school. And I know the colleges
Hmm.
care about that and look at that. How is that addressed at the college level as far as understanding like the high school that the students coming from?
Yeah. Great question. I think what a lot of people don't realize is when a college is evaluating your transcript, they're sitting it next to your school profile. And I think that's the biggest piece that parents and students are missing is that everything is in context to the high school that you attend. And so many times, like you just said, people rattle off stats. I have a 3.9, I have a 1400, I took, 6 APs and I was denied, but this person had this many APs. And so none of that really matters until you say, okay, how does that GPA compare to other students in your school? How does that SAT compare to other students in your school? Your 6 APs, did your school allow you to only take six and you just maxed out? So therefore you have the most rigorous curriculum? Or could you have been taking six every year since freshman year? And so you've got other kids in your class that have, 15, 20 APs and you have six. So really your six isn't that impressive. So again, everything is in context to the school that they go to. But I think what happens is people get, talking to others or go online to social media and they're just saying, well, my kid had this and this is what got them in. But that gives you absolutely no context to where they're coming from and how that ranks or rates them in comparison to other students within their school. And so that is the I would say the biggest takeaway of really the entire probably episode that we're doing is people always need to say like this is my transcript, this is my school profile. How am I in context? Because if you don't understand where you are in context, I think you're going to be really surprised with a lot of your admissions decisions because you just have no kind of threshold in your mind of really where you stand and are you competitive. You go and you look at these schools common data sets where they share information, what percent of their class comes from maybe the top 10% at their high school, right? That ranks in the top 10%. If you have a school like Notre Dame that is saying 92% of our kids are in the top 10% of their high school, and you have no idea where you stand or you're not sure, I think you're going to have a list as you're building it that's not completely reflective of what schools are really what could be within reach, what are not. So it's very helpful for them to look.
I think listening to you, like, the in context is the key takeaway there. And again, I mean, I'm just a big like, if you're looking at that and say you're a parent and like, "I understand that. I understand this profile gets sent, and we offer" whatever. There's 15 AP options at our high school. Jenna and I will speak for Jenna because I know she feels this way just from knowing you as much as I do. We're not saying if your school has 15 APs, your kid should be taking 15 APs because the school's looking at the profile. You got to look at your child. And I did this with my daughter. She's not a math kid, didn't even make her take math senior year. I called all the schools on her list and said, "Is this a deal breaker?" And they said, "Yeah." I'm like, "It's off the list." Like, I just took it off the list because my kid, she's a therapist now. She didn't need the math. She had gone through, I think it was pre-calc. She never took calculus. I know this seems insane in the crazy world of these kids needing to be, quote unquote super kids, but I did that. So I knew what was best for my kid. So don't get on the crazy train and think that you have to, look at that profile and have your kid maximizing their APs. So Jenna, do you want to elaborate on that? Disagree, agree about, a school that might have major APs and parents are looking at that and trying to guide their kids?
Always think there needs to be a balance. So I agree with you. I think understanding your student and where they're going to do well is just as important as, the courses you're selecting because at the end of the day, you want your student to have a strong transcript. And so you also don't want to sacrifice their grades just because you're overloading them. And to your point, what are the schools you're applying to? Looking for. Yes, if you're applying to the more selective schools and more popular majors, then you don't have as much wiggle room with some of those kind of expected courses, things like calculus, the high level language courses, the higher AP, science related courses. But if your student is applying to a school with more of kind of the average acceptance rate and maybe not as crazy a non-STEM, non-business major, do you need to put yourself in these courses that are going to overwhelm yourself? No, I think one of the biggest things is students and parents alike, they're always talking about, I always say the same 30 or so schools. In reality, there's what, almost 2,000 colleges out there, and the vast majority most students can get into. So I think when we see this panic, it all stems around kind of the hysteria around the same 30 schools. And if your student isn't looking at those, why are we overreacting and overloading them and putting them into things that just don't even make sense?
Yeah. 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 Totally. So, yeah, I just wanted to clarify that for our listeners. We're trying to give you an idea of how this landscape works, but ultimately, your child and you can't choreograph things to get into school based on, I mean, that's absolutely true. And what Jenna was talking about earlier, you have no idea of these schools' priorities anyways. So I think it kind of relieves some stress to say, well, I can't control all that. So you just let it go. You just let it go, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you and I were talking about in-state public schools, and things have changed dramatically with some of these schools and the number of applications they get and their selectivity. And can you speak to that? I know UCLA years ago, 75% of kids got in, and now today
Right.
it's this completely different ball game. So can you speak to that piece for people that are, looking at a lot of in-state public schools for the kids?
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously state schools are there to serve their state students. And I think what ends up happening a lot of times is people don't always realize just how selective some of them have become for out of state students. And I would say, especially post COVID, I live in the Northeast, so I'm in New Jersey. And I feel like the way a lot of, say, like the Northeast experienced COVID was very different from some other states. And so I remember at the time I was working in a high school, and when students were making decisions of where to go to school that upcoming year, our state was still in lockdown mode. Students were going to have to be taking virtual classes. They were going to have to wear masks. And if you're 18 and you're starting out college, that is not at all how you want to experience. And so all of a sudden you saw that shift where the South became very popular at, especially those Southern schools. If you go back and you look at, say, Auburn from 2020, I think the admit rate was somewhere around like 80, 85%. And now we're getting like below 40. So you saw this huge shift. And now I think we're also starting to see it in the Midwest as the South has become very hot. And so parents and students, as they're applying, especially if they've had older students go through the process before, I think they don't always realize it can be just as competitive as almost an Ivy in some cases when you start talking about, say, UNC Chapel Hill, University of Texas Austin, for an out of state student to get in. And so it just has to be part of the puzzle if you are an out of state applicant, especially to states that primarily serve their in state kids where they have thresholds they have to maintain. North Carolina, 82% have to be in state, 12%, can be from out of state. So it's like when you're up against that, you better be kind of the best of the best in terms of SATs, your course rigor, all of that, because that pool is going to be just exceptionally competitive.
Yeah, yeah. So I just know I used to live outside of Seattle and the University of Washington. Yeah, it was every year a lot of counselors. We were all in a listserv, the Seattle area counselors, and they would share, confidentially, hey, this student profile versus this. And it was always like, wow, so that student got in and that one didn't. There's just, again, it's the same theme that we're talking about, Jenna. There's just so much variability. There's so much
Hmm.
going on behind the scenes that you just cast a wide net and you don't stress about all these pieces. And hopefully what we're talking about today helps some parents and students say, oh, okay, you just got to take deep breaths and move through this process and not get all bent out of shape about this stuff. And just along those lines, and I hear people doing this, and I'm sure you hear it much more. Well, people will say they will compare decisions that happened the year before. I mean, I've had parents that have kids that are 2 or 3 years apart, and it's like,
Hmm.
oh, well, my daughter got into NYU and blah, blah, blah. So my second
Right.
daughter should be fine. Can you speak to that? Like, just comparing, even if it's just a year back, which you would think, well, that should be similar. Can you speak to that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so much changes from year to year. And the other thing is, again, I think it goes back to like maybe their stats are similar, but there are so many other variables from, you know, are they really the same applicant? Are they looking at the same majors? What do their recommendation letters look like? What are the actual courses that they took to prepare them? And then again, those college initiatives that they have, are they looking to bring in a larger freshman class or did they potentially over enroll last year? And so they actually have to bring in fewer students. So even if you think you have the same student, chances are you probably don't. And then just the initiatives altogether are going to be completely different. And I think we've seen that every year. I think we chatted about this before. I feel like every year, especially since COVID, there just seems to have been something major each year that really disrupts the enrollment kind of schedule, right? You go in and you apply to all these schools, and then these things happen along the way, right? There's FAFSA delays the one year, and now we're extending enrollment deposits. There's issues in the federal government that now international student visas are hard to get. And so now we're dipping further into wait lists later in the year. And students are shifting over the summer where they typically don't do as much. And so every year there are just things that shake up the cycle. And so even when you look at statistics, it's almost like there needs to be a little caveat. Like I share waitlist stats all the time. And then it's like, we have to remember this year we went to it a lot more than in previous years because there was this going on. So everything kind of impacts, what else is going on in the world. And so again, every cycle is going to have its own set of circumstances surrounding. And so parents just need to take that into consideration. Even like I said, yes, you can control what you can and you know your student's profile, but all of the rest of it just continues to change long after you apply.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like we need a footnote, like when they talk about investments, the world I used to be in. Past results do not dictate future returns or something like that, because it's just super accurate that, yeah, every
Mhm.
year is different, right? Every year is different. The
Mhm.
priorities are different. Now you're even talking about stuff happens, right? I'm saying stuff instead of the
Right.
usual word that people say. It's just life. Like change happens. Like to
Mhm.
your point, that FAFSA Simplification Act threw everything up in the air and all the timelines and the colleges are scrambling. So of course, that's not a year that's going to be just like the year before. So again,
Mhm.
it's just more information to say there's just so much going on. It's so important to have a good list, cast a wide net, and you see where you fall. Let's just talk, and I know you might have touched on this earlier, but I know I used to live in Texas way back when, and they had a this percent, the top percent, and it's probably changed
Mhm.
by now because it's been a while since I lived there. And I'm sure you know the Texas percent that in-state kids will get into X, Y, A&M, I think is different than UT. Do a lot of states
Mhm.
have that, and how does that play into all of this, where they say they're gonna accept, the top 10 or 5% kids in rankings?
It's becoming more common to say a lot of states no. I think the last time I counted, it was maybe 12 or 14 states that do these like guaranteed admissions. It's growing. A lot of states within the past couple of years have introduced like Wisconsin, Tennessee, but I would say by far Texas has one of the toughest because UT Austin is down to the top 5% at their high school. So it's extremely selective and you're just getting an acceptance to the school, not necessarily to your major. A&M is at 10%. I would not be surprised if in the future that goes lower just because their applicant pool just continues to increase. They're not a state that will be impacted by the enrollment cliff. In fact, Texas will only continue to grow. So there will be more graduating seniors in the coming years. So I would expect at some point, and Texas A&M is kind of on a 5 year, I think we're in like year 2 now of them wanting to bring in smaller classes. So I that would be a perfect example of a school that would need to lower it. Florida right now is got some stuff in the legislature to try to change, the balance between in-state and out-of-state. So it's great for the students that qualify. I think it puts a lot of pressure on the kids that don't to be able to stay within their state, which I know frustrates parents because obviously they're paying taxes in hopes of their student being able to go to, the schools. But yeah, it is definitely a growing trend to have more of these guaranteed admissions.
So, do you think it is possible if you have a student or a parent come to you and say, "Hey, Jenna, can you give me an idea of predict, will my child get into XYZ school?" I mean, is this just something where you just say, that's not possible, or it depends on the school, or you feel pretty certain about certain situations where you can predict that?
Think it really depends what the list looks like. If they start applying to a lot of selective schools, or even now, it seems like even if there's schools that are, say, less than 30-40% acceptance rate, it's becoming harder to predict. I think students now are just applying to more and more schools. Common App just came out with their latest report, and it showed again for this current cycle, students were applying to more schools than in the past. So I think from an admission standpoint, it's getting harder for the schools to figure out who's most likely to attend. And so I think they're trying to get a little bit more creative with who they're accepting and who they think will matriculate because I see so many surprises along the way, yield management, yield protection, whatever you want to kind of call it, where even those high flyer students who by all means have the credentials to get into certain schools, sometimes colleges almost think the opposite, like, oh, the student won't come here. They have such good stats. So they end up deferring them. They end up waitlisting them to kind of see if the student sticks around. So I feel like it's becoming harder. I mean, I still always try to categorize somewhat for for a parent's sake, just to say like these should be reaches, these should be, ones that could go kind of 50-50, and these should be ones that you could get into. But I think it also depends on major too, because sometimes you get into these majors that are very much capped, say like nursing. And so even though it may be a quote safety school for you, because they have to get their yield so right with these programs that are space limited, they may take students that have less credentials just because they're more likely to come, especially if they measure demonstrated interest versus a student who looks like they're just applying as a safety. So I think it is becoming a little bit more difficult given the volume that colleges are dealing with.
Yeah, and this lends back to what we were talking about at the beginning with the big business. And Jenna keeps mentioning yield. That's all about these colleges very closely track like what are our yield targets in the different, throughout when they start accepting kids through the end of April. So it's a big business. They have different priorities. And to what you said earlier about a safety school, I know a counselor really well up in Seattle, and several years ago, he had a student who did not get into the University of Washington as an in-state Washington kid, but got into Harvard. And my kind of not admissions expert opinion on it was to what you just said. Like they are just like, this kid isn't going to come. So why would we can accept another kid that we think is more likely to come? And so they just flat out denied him. So this kind of stuff, I don't know that you
Hmm.
saw that 15, 20 years ago, but it does happen,
Right.
which just adds another thing there. But again, I mean, my key takeaway, and then I'm going to ask you, Brenna, Jenna, before we and finish up here, is there are so many variables. There's so much stuff you can't control that Jenna talked about today. So it's not the way I would look at it. This isn't stressful. It's like, this is all off my shoulders. I can't control it. And what you can
Hmm.
control is understanding your child. If you're working with a professional in this space, just really trying to find where your child's going to thrive and understanding kind of the safety mid stretch building of a list that still exists, but realizing it's a lot more challenging. So, do you have, out of all the great stuff you've shared today, any key takeaways you want to share for the parents and students?
Yeah. So I think the biggest takeaway is we spent most of the time obviously talking about just the application process and kind of what goes into it. But I think that's one takeaway that, or maybe two takeaways that I want parents and students to walk away with is there's just so much emphasis about getting in, but there's so much more about finding the right fit and kind of who you are as you're starting this process. If you're a junior right now, building your list and thinking about where you're going to apply, who you are next year on May 1st, when it's time to make a decision, can be a completely different person. And I think that's why, back to what you said in the beginning about cast a wide net. I mean, I have students that I started working with this time last year that were very adamant. They were getting on a plane, they wanted a big school, and now all of a sudden they're switching over to a small private liberal arts school that's only a couple hours away. So it's like who you are and who you're becoming is going to continue to evolve. And there's so much more that should be beyond just getting in, really putting just as much effort into researching the fit, the overall happiness, that you're going to experience as you go to certain schools because of the opportunities that are there, the mentorship, possibilities, what is going to prepare you for the next step. I think we get kind of tunnel vision for that. We want that yes, but then what does it look like beyond that yes? And really finding what is going to be right, because I think there's such a small turnaround time, especially if you're not hearing until regular decision, when you're hearing mid-March to almost April, and then you have to make a decision by May 1. That I just encourage people as you're going through and you're doing the research just for applying, that you're also really deep diving schools more so that you have kind of the grace to give yourself later when it does come time to make a decision.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And like I always say to people, find where your child's going to thrive. And I think that's just another way of saying the fit that you're talking about. And I also firmly believe that a no throughout life, not just in this space, it's an opportunity. A
Mhm,
no is an opportunity. It's
mhm,
not necessarily a negative. And there's, you and I have been around the block, and I'm sure you have examples from your life, and I do in mine, and seen my friends at
Mhm.
things that seem like they were the worst thing, and then you look back in 3 years and go, "You know what? That was alright that that happened because that led
Mhm.
me here and here and here."
Yeah.
So I think that's, I always tell parents, if your child didn't get in there, they're meant to go somewhere else? So I
Yeah.
firmly believe that, and I think that that mindset will kind of help in this whole process. So, all right, Jenna. Well, thank you for being here. I knew this would be a great conversation. I so appreciate you taking the time to join me today and sharing all your insights. And again, definitely follow Jenna on Instagram, College Navigators. She's great, lots of great data. And that's another thing. We're a data company with our software. There's just a lot. Data is all about accuracy and how you look at it. And especially you're great at sharing different time frames that the colleges release stuff and everything, and the deadlines and all that stuff are hugely important. So definitely check out Jenna on social media. She's doing great stuff. So
Thanks so
again,
much for having me.
thanks for being here. And we will yeah, of course. And we'll see everybody next time.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you heard, please follow us, share our show, or maybe even send it to a parent or counselor who you think would enjoy it. I'm your host, Peg Keough. Today I spoke with Jenna Schebell, a seasoned admissions expert who has held admissions office leadership positions as well as working in high schools and college counseling. She now has her own company, College Navigator, where she works with families directly. This episode was produced by the amazing Eileen Campbell, and we'll see you back here next week.